This is Molly Reamer with Bridget's Grove, and I am here on the porch of the tiny temple to make a little video about how to lay out a goddess grid. And I've been meaning to do this for a long time since I do so many of them, and people have asked about it, and today felt like the right day. So, I start out by gathering my supplies, my materials, and I'm very influenced by what's happening in the world around me. And so it is fall now, leaves are falling, acorns are falling, things are changing colors. And so what I lay out often has to do with the season, the mood, the energy of the time and place in which I am. It also has to just do with aesthetics, really, and the colors that are pleasing and the elements that are pleasing to me. And then also sometimes I will choose to do a grid for a very specific intention or purpose. So a lot of times it's very mood based, like I'm trying to convey something or communicate something about the season, the mood, the theme, the feeling of the time. And then sometimes it's because I have a specific intention. So let's say peace or harmony or prosperity or love or soothing, like a general, like soothing of a chaotic or contentious atmosphere perceived like in the world at large, in social media, etc., etc. And so though you can be even more, and so you can be very intentional about it. And so if you, with love, you choose the stones that are associated with love, compassion, and those kinds of concepts. But like I said, I often choose elements because because I like the way they look together. They feel right together. That's what feels good to me. And so today, I collected all these acorns because I've been noticing them, and they are nice and big and pretty. And I have these red flowers that are growing outside that have grown all year in the flower boxes outside the house. You can see them a little bit there. And some flowers from beefsteak mint, some leaves, of course, some clover because I was thinking about luck and good luck and the fact that you still need a little green in your life even if it's deepening to fall. And then I have a tendency to pick out my potential centerpieces in advance also. Oh, I have a little dish of crystals here in case I need those. And then but I have my little candles, some stones that are the right color for the season. I have all kinds of mini goddesses here in the right colors. I recognize that most of you won't have quite as many at your disposal to use, but I am fortunate in that I always have many to choose from. Harvest Goddess, in case she wants to join the layout, some dried herbs, and smoky quartz, and calcite. And then I have some stones picked out. I have some carnelian leaves and some little pumpkins that I've been planning to use. And also possibly, again, this is kind of going with the mood and the energy of fall and the harvest season. So I have citrine, carnelian, and then some calcite in this bag, and some more quartz and carnelian moons. But I get everything prepared in advance. I go on a little walk and it becomes a ritual in and of itself, just choosing and selecting the elements that I want to include, and it drops me into this mindful sort of place of reflection and contemplation, and where I consider, like, what is it that I mean to convey with this grid? What am I doing with this grid? So I walk around looking for the elements to include, and they tell me often, what I want to communicate, or they just go together nicely. So I get everything prepared in advance, and then I build it. And a lot of times I use multiple elements and then I rearrange them. So let's say I did want to use the pumpkin candle and then I do want to use the little Hecate wheel. I will just swap them out and then I'll take more pictures or change things around. So because once I've gone to the trouble of gathering all my supplies, I want to make good use of my grid building. But I joke that, or not, it's not a joke because it's actually serious. I call it Goddess Zen gardening because I find that the process of laying all the elements out is a very reflective, contemplative, stilling of the mind process. Like you actually, as you work to build it, everything else kind of falls away and there's only this act of creation. And so it instantly shifts, for me it instantly shifts my brain from a linear left brain kind of thinking process into a right brain creative process, thoughtful process that is like a meditative state. So I call it Goddess in Gardening because it instantly like stills the mind, calms the thoughts, and brings you into what feels to me like a state of harmony with the world and with yourself, where you're open, receptive, intuitive, connected, and free. And I find it a really valuable stilling process and opportunity to connect. If I have bigger items to include, I lay those out first using with the grid on top. Sometimes I use an altar cloth underneath it for a background, but a lot of times I just like the deck. And then after I've laid out the bigger items, I start to place other items around in the way that feels best. You will see that sometimes, I've two things I wanted to say. Sometimes when something's pointing away from the grid, it's sending energy out, and when something's pointing in, it's bringing energy in. And so, so I opted today to put the acorns point in, which would kind of imply that this energy of new growth or incubation of ideas and possibilities is pulling in versus being sent outward. But sometimes, as I said, it's just aesthetics. I like the way it looks that way as opposed to the other direction. And then the other thing I wanted to make sure to mention is that I'm very mindful of what I pick and choose, that there's plenty of it. So I don't, if there's something there's only a few, like there's some chicory growing right now. Oh, you can't, that's really, my porch needs to be swept. There's some chicory growing right now, but there's not much of it, and so I'd rather that it was just growing instead of picking it. But the beefsteak mint, the green pieces, there's tons and tons of it, and it's a little bit of a nuisance plant anyway, and so it feels, you know, appropriate to pick it. So be mindful if you're picking anything versus gathering anything, that you are not decimating a plant population or taking advantage of a plant population to create your object of beauty. And then I choose the mini goddesses to put around, and sometimes I choose them depending on which grid I'm using. If I'm using the Women's Wheel of Life, I often choose goddesses that represent or correspond with the life stages on the Wheel of Life grid. If I'm using another goddess grid, I often choose goddesses, mini goddesses based on color, but sometimes also on representation. So each little mini goddess has a meaning and a purpose, which is partially in the design and style of each mini, but also partially in the color. So it's a harmony or a union between those two elements as far as what each one of them means. And so sometimes, again, I choose based on aesthetics, which looks good together and what color looks good, and then also on representation. So if I want to make sure that I have joy represented, or I make sure I want to have multiple life stages, so I made sure to put a little mother and baby on there because I like to have different phases of people's lives represented. I made sure to put a black spiral goddess for the deeper, darker energy of the darker half of the year as we sink into winter, as we're headed into winter. And so I wanted to make sure to get her, but also some joy, some reflection, some contemplation, some unity, and some storytelling. And then this time I chose the pumpkin candle centerpiece, but as I noted, I have other options of things to include, and I'll probably do several. And then I start to add the smaller centerpiece, and then I add the goddesses, and then some of the smaller design elements. And even though I have other ideas and other materials and things collected, a lot of times I just know when it feels right, it feels like it has enough, and that if I continue adding elements, it might become quote-unquote too much, so maybe there's not enough Maybe there's no such thing as too much. And then once I am done with what feels right, I often will go ahead and choose a card to kind of close out my little ritual time, but also to shed some additional insight or reflection on the process that I have just completed. And it kind of, sometimes it connects to the theme of what I've created. Aha, so 2 triangles, so we're going to focus. And you can also choose the cards first, so that then what you're creating goes, is in connection with the card meaning. So maybe then you take inspiration from focus to create a grid that has to do with focusing your energy, your power, And then I got from the Sacred Traveler Oracle, we got discovering truth. You stand in the light of truth. So what are we focusing on, and what truth are we discovering? How might it be illuminated? Each grid that I create is a process in and of itself, and it has lessons to teach me and insights to share, and just the experience of creating it is a worthwhile one for the impact on mood and energy and inspiration and connection and fun. Thank you.